Hello, this is Neil from iPaintGirls.com and MasterEdit.net. You can find more of my tutorials. The links are in the description for drawing, painting, and writing. Right, so let's go ahead and get started. In this tutorial, I'm going to be drawing or showing how to shade a tattoo design. So in this case, it's a demon head tattoo design. What we have here is the line work. I'm going to add a shading to it that's going to go from kind of like this. So the shading will be like this. So imagine that's the lamp source. So it's kind of be at a diagonal from the right. It's pretty much the same shading type I do for everything I do. Most everything I do, I'd use that shading type. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set the background layer to a skin tone. You can just find a picture online that's of a large picture on Google Images or a skin texture or something. Just put that in the background. The reason why I like to do that when I'm designing the coloring part of the tattoo or the shading part of the tattoo is it's ultimately going to be on skin, and so I want to see how it's going to look on skin. And you use skin as kind of like the mid-tone, and you can put highlights, lighter tones on top of the skin to bring out highlight parts and so forth. So in this method, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to lock the line layer so I don't actually work on the line layer. Make a new layer. I'm going to set it to multiply. I'm going to have several layers that I set to multiply, layer on top of each other, and this is how I'm going to get the desired effect that I'm going for. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a medium tone of gray. I look at the piece and I think, well, what parts, if this object were black and white, if this were already a finished picture and it was black and white, in the value scheme, what would be darker than the skin, that is the skin of the face itself? In this case, his hair is going to be darker and maybe his horns. So the first thing I do is I go in with this color then before I even begin thinking about shading, and I outline it like this. So go along the outline of the object. I'm going to go ahead and pause while I do that. Once the object is outlined, then I take the magic wand tool here and I click inside of there. Now I actually have an action already recorded that I can just push play and it does it for me. But let me go ahead and show you what it does. I go to select, modify, I expand by 2 pixels, click OK. Edit, fill, and I fill with the foreground color, click OK. That's what my action does. So that way I don't have to do those steps every time. I just go and click action. It's done because I use that method a lot. Now I decide, well, do I want the horns also be a slightly darker shade than the face? And I think yes, it'll make the image pop more. So I'm going to go ahead and do the exact same thing I did with the hair to the horns. Once I have the tone separations, that is the difference within each object, the value of each object to its true color if there was no light in existence, in a sense that everything was lit the exact same way and there was no shadows on the object. So I have the tone separation. I might even have the horns be a little lighter than the goatee, for example. That might be something I think that might look better. But I'm going to keep it the same for now and see what happens. The next thing I do then is I come in and I start adding the shading to the object. To do that is I first make another layer and I set that to multiply as well. I'm going to use the exact same gray or maybe even a slightly lighter gray, but I'm going to start with the exact same gray and see what happens here. Right, so continuing on. One thing to think about when you're doing shading is a mesh that's going over your image. That gives each object within it its own individual shape. So that's one shape there, and then you might think of the mesh coming like that. So the light isn't be hitting, if the light's coming like this, the light will be hitting this part of the mesh more than any other part. So all this part would be more shaded, all in here like this. Right, so that's one thing to think about. Another is that you have another shape here. You want to think about individual shapes stacked on top of each other, as if you're working clay. And this is why it's really good to learn form, is to build clay sculpture and learn how to model with clay. Because you do the basic form and then you add on shapes, like you would add this shape on with clay. And so I'd imagine this as its own mesh. Right? So maybe even more like this. And I know that this would be the part that hits most light, and so everything else would be the part that has more shading. And I just go through that with every object in the face and I think about it that way. This will be its own shape, nose its own shape, which has a couple shapes on it, and so forth. That's what I'm going to be thinking about as I'm going through adding the first level of shading. The second level of shading, I think of objects that are overlapping other objects and whether they would have a cast shadow, like the horns and so forth. Right, so let's go ahead and do this first level of shading then. I'm going to go ahead and shade all that object like so. I can also add a second level to the shading if I wanted to. And I can also go ahead and do the same exact technique I did before with, running through and outlining this object here and then filling it in with the action that I made. So I'm going to go ahead and go like this, fill all this in with my action. Boom, done. There might be some little corners that it missed, and then I'll go ahead and fill it in. If I did a second layer, I would do another shade over this with the exact same color, but I would put it all like this, or more like that, and then I would have all that again, and it would go over with a new layer, and I'll show you what that looks like if I decide to do that. But at first I need to go ahead and add the shading here for some of this stuff, some of the basic shapes within the object. And that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to go ahead and fill that in, bam, like that. Again, there might be little parts that it misses. I just go in and fill those in as I see necessary. I'm not worried about drop shadows yet, but I'm going to have to get to that too. I'm going to want them to be darker, so I'm going to go ahead and start adding in the drop shadows with this. By drop shadows I mean objects that are overlapping, like this object here is overlapping that, so it leaves this little drop shadow right here. And I don't feel like doing the other way I did it, so I'm just going to go ahead and do it this way. I know all that's going to have a drop shadow all right in here, like so. So I'm going to call it like drop shadows or shadows, casting shadows, whatever, and then modeling. So this would be modeling right here. Now I'm doing modeling. This is within the object itself. This is not what the object is casting onto another object. And notice also now the shadow is going to be a little bit darker because I have that, I'm on multiply, and I have that underlining shade, so they're overlapping each other. And this is good. This is what I want. So that's the modeling. Now I'm going to do cast shadow here. And I'm thinking about the horn is going to kind of leave some shape like this. It can take years and years of practice to start getting the hang of form and how shadows are laid down and so forth, from your mind at least. That's why a lot of beginning artists, when they draw from their mind, it really lacks depth. Now I'm going to go ahead, so I don't forget, I'm going to make another layer here. I'm going to set it to multiply, and because it's on top and I'm using the exact same color of gray, as I come over here and add in drop shadows, I want to darken that drop shadow up because I want it to be darker than everything else. It's blending on top of the color that's already there. This allows me to add another layer of depth to the shading process. And so the same thing over here, all this right here was actually a drop shadow being casted from the other object. And so I want that to show through. And there's going to be another one there from the wrinkle. I should just kind of come like this. And notice all this will all end up adding depth. I can go back and forth between those two layers. What I want to go ahead and show you real fast is another thing I can do is I can mark out the part where the highlight will be, then come around and trace along here the exact same place that I drew before. And this will add an extra layer of depth if I wanted to the shading there. If I wanted to go a little bit darker on the head overall, then I would go ahead and, oops, I forgot to complete that. Okay, I need to complete this all the way around over here. I think that's it. Okay, and then I go ahead and fill it in. And notice what it automatically does is, because it's overlaying, as that becomes darker and this becomes lighter. And so now I have a second layer of shadow if I wanted to, but I'm not going to do that. But I just want to show you how I could do that if I wanted to. I'll go back. There we go. So I know that I'm going to have, I'm going to go back here now. I'm going to the other layer underneath. So you can see the layer that's highlighted there. Add some form to this object here. And I know that there's going to be a, let's see here, I'm just going to add a little bit of shading texture there. The horn's going to kind of be coming like this, I think. Across all this object. Like that. Now I'm going to go ahead, fill that in. Come back with this layer so I don't forget. That's why sometimes I like working on those two layers there. This whole part right here might be darker, so I'm going to go ahead and fill all that in. Like so. Sometimes the shadow will be distorted by the objects it's falling onto, and I could have made it, more distorted by the object it's falling on, but that's fine. It looks fine. I'm going to go back to this again, modeling, and I'm thinking about this whole overall texture as well as when I'm shading it. I'm trying to think of the texture as what I'm shading too. So I know, it's not just totally flat, so I need to add in, the curves and ridges into this object. And a lot of this here is going to be under, because the way the object is shaped. So the light will be hitting the top, will be hitting a little bit of the bottom part here, but a lot of this is under. And so I'm going to shade it like this. There might be some parts where I really want a deeper level of shadow within this that I can see with like creases and stuff like that. And so what I would do, I'd go back to the layer that's on top more, maybe add another level of darkness in some parts here. Just because I know that's going to be more receded away from the light, and since it's farther receded away from the light, I might receive a little bit more darkness to some of these areas. Like so. So notice it really starts to add depth to the piece here as I begin adding layers of shadow. I'm going to treat this nostril as its own separate shape here. Like so. I know there's going to be a little bit of shadow here. There's going to be some drop shadow here on this side. Treating this whole under part of the nose as its own separate shape as well. That is, I'm thinking about two different shapes of the nose. You have this big piece here, and you have that nostril there. So it's like two shapes that I'm thinking about. And so I know the light hits there on that object. And then I might have a little bit of shade here, and maybe a little bit here. Depends on if there's another wrinkle in the face there or not. I'm not even going to worry yet about the cast out of the nose, but I know it's gonna have to exist there. This whole under part of the eye, I want it darker. Makes it look more menacing. Now I'm thinking about the whole shape here of the face. That part of the cheek there is its own separate shape, receiving its own light. Remember the mesh thing I was telling you about? All that's in my head as I'm doing this. Now I can think about the cast shadow of the nose white cast, which is going to be all in this area here. And again, that might receive a darker shade. At least part of it might, like here, just to show. Then so it's like a two-tone shadow there. I can also blend those together with whip shading, whatever. And in this case, I can use a soft brush to whip those together, so it's not so hard. And so I can use this soft brush here, and I can kind of blend that together. And you can do this, here and there throughout the drawing if you want. Just to add a sense of more depth, and I can, because you can do it with whip shading and also with what's it called? Well, you basically use gray washes, and you do the same kind of color shading you would normally do. It's a very fast movement like this, little circular movements, and so you'd go like this, and that's how you'd use like the tattoo gun and like kind of circle motions like that. And you just pull in the gray wash, and you have different types of gray washes. So one gray wash might have like a thimble with water and just one drop of ink in it. Another one might have 2 or 3 drops of ink, and then another one might have 5 drops of ink. And each gray wash gets darker and darker, and that allows you to get the values to your picture. It looks like I'm running out of time here, so if you want to see part 2 to this, please let me know, and I'll post part 2. I might go ahead and see. No, I'm actually running out of time here, so I can't do any more. Sorry, guys. If you'd like to see this completed, this technique here that I've been using, and how you can apply it, to tattoo design as I've been showing you here, and how that would apply to actually when you start to tattoo, let me know, and I'll go ahead and finish this tutorial. But I think I have to go ahead and cut it short here. There's a lot you can learn. I think I probably should do part 2, because there's a lot you can learn just from how I'm talking about shading and everything like I've done so far, and how things overlap each other and so forth. All right, I hope you enjoyed this multiply layer. Go ahead and practice what you've learned so far. Let me know how it works out for you. Leave comment messages. I appreciate it.